What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. I know that this is new to some of you, and if you have been following us, formerly known as Coast to Coast Sports, I am your host, Matthew Raridan. And just like I said at the beginning, we are under a new name. Yes, you heard that right, under a new name. We have now partnered up with American Daily Press, and this is an American Daily Press Productions here. So I want to go over a couple things today just to kind of clear the air for new and existing audiences and what this show is about. So I'm going to take a dive right into it. We were formerly known as Coast to Coast Sports, and that was kind of our story just within the name there. Coast to Coast Sports. I am an Oregon Ducks fan, if you do not know. And we had David Street here, who is a Florida Gators fan. And I reached out to him one day and I said, look, I have this idea. We both wanted to start a show one day. It was our passion, it was our dream, and we really wanted to get together and do something different. I think the fans out there, we always have different opinions on how sports shows could be better. They could do this, they could do that. But what were we really doing? We weren't really doing anything about it. So I said, David, let's do something different here. So I reached out to him and we started this thing called Coast to Coast Sports. And we wanted to talk things, everything Oregon Ducks, Oregon Ducks football, baseball, basketball, softball, and same thing with Florida and everything in between, because here we are stretched out from coast to coast, from Pacific to Atlantic. And we just absolutely love the idea. We thought this was perfect. This is what the fans really wanted to hear. They wanted to hear the recruiting. I mean, you feel like you don't hear a whole lot that from the recruiting class on a lot of sports shows, and that was something that we had in mind. So we wanted to be different, and that's exactly how we wanted to be different. Is we made these changes to our shows to kind of show exactly who we are and where we want to be. And like I said before, it is a dream of ours to not only talk sports, but to be a part of it. It's just kind of it's always been in our DNAs. And along the lines, we did bring on Ed Smith, who is our Texas Longhorn fans, and he's going to eventually talk about how he was brought onto the show. But I kind of want to talk really quick about who I am, who is Matthew Raridan, and how did I become to love sports? Well, it all started out young, and a lot of people have this very similar story where seems like the first thing they ever did was pick up a ball, whether it was baseball, football, basketball, bouncy ball, you name it. That's exactly who I was, is a kid that wanted to play sports from the very get-go. That's exactly what I did. If it wasn't going to a game such as a San Francisco Giants game, I was playing the game. And I started out baseball very young age, from T-ball all the way up. I've played baseball, I've played football, anything with a ball, I've played it. And it's always been a passion of mine. And one of the downsides that I hit as I got older was I didn't really have the size. I was great at what I did, but when it comes to wanting to go to college, you kind of had to have the size. And that was one thing that I did not. But I never gave up with sports. There's so many things you could do with sports, such as what we're doing right now. And if you knew anyone that I knew, they would tell you, Matthew, someday is going to be in sports. He may not be playing it, but he's going to talk it because he knows everything there is about sports. And I, not to pat myself on the back, but I'd say they're absolutely right. So here I am today with these two wonderful gentlemen, and we are here to talk sports. We are here to talk about recruiting. We're here to talk about anything that you could think of when it comes to sports. And I want to say that they probably share that same thing as me, that this has become kind of a dream come true. So that's just kind of briefly my background and how I became to have the passion there is in sports. And I feel like I probably share that with a lot of people, including my co-host here. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the torch here to David Street, who is one of our hosts. David, please tell the audience, how did you come to love sports?
Thank you, Matthew. And yeah, you pretty much took the words right out of my mouth about how we got started. I had been dreaming for quite some time to do a podcast. I'm a huge podcast fan. I love listening to them. But it was something that I really wanted to do for quite some time, but I never really started because I always struggled with the concept of, okay, well, what am I going to base my podcast on? And then eventually, of course, I knew I wanted to do a Florida Gators. I wanted to talk about my Florida Gators, but even then, it was just a struggle just to get started. So I don't think it was a coincidence at all that like literally around the time when I'm strongly considering it, like I can just feel the passion in me. Of course, that's when you reached out to me and you presented me with a very unique idea that I ultimately couldn't turn down. And I'm definitely glad to be in this journey with both you and Ed. Now, as for how I like sports, man, like I have been obsessed with sports for as long as I can remember, and I've always viewed it as an escape from the stresses of life. Man, we all go through stuff, but sports is what I like to call one of the great escapes. And if you want to know how obsessed with sports I am, I can recall many times back in school, like in college, when I should have been doing homework or classwork, but instead I'm secretly on my phone just looking up random sports stats or looking at sports recaps. And I've especially have always been fascinated with the idea of advanced stats, which really kind of gives you an idea of who's truly good, and it also kind of gives you an idea of who the more underrated players are. But yeah, that's pretty much my story right there. I've always been obsessed with sports. I've wanted to start a podcast for a while now, and the fact that I'm quite literally living my dream with you guys, I mean, it's a dream come true, truly.
I agree 100%. So, Ed, why don't you also let the fans know kind of how you became on the show and what made you kind of pick up sports?
I appreciate it, Matt. Um, well, I grew up a little bit earlier than these guys did, and I truly was on that back page of the newspaper stat sheet for an hour every day, picking up everything there was to know about every little detail that I could find. Then I would go through all the summaries uh, and watching all the sports on television that was available at that time, which, not to date myself, there was only 3 or 4 channels that were showing football games on Saturdays and Sundays at that time. So from a very young age, I have been consuming as much sports material as I can. We're talking watching ESPN 2 and 3 times before I go into school, and then a couple times at night before I go to bed. It's the same thing, just every waking moment growing up was about sports. And having all that information, you become, just entrenched in, how sports can really show you what leadership is in life and, how to overcome adversity. So all that kind of came together, and that's kind of who I've become in life as somebody that can really know all these things and give background information, give some trivia information, give uh, an opinion on stuff. So when Matthew had to step away from Coast to Coast Sports for a couple of weeks because some exciting things were happening in his life, they reached out to me and said, "Hey Ed, we know you bring a lot to the table. Why don't you come in and just check it out, dip your toes, see if you like it." And it's always been something that I've wanted to do myself. You know, with all the information that I had, I always actually looked up to the sportscaster just as much as the athletes on the field. And with this podcasting format, I feel like that is, a way that I can bring this information to life and really kind of tell the story, just seeing how it's been done for gosh, I would say 35 years I've been watching sports. So all that, ties a big bow on how we all came together. And, just there's a lot of information here. We're going to have our opinions, and we are going to give those opinions. Agree with me, disagree with me. If I think Matthew and David feel the same way, and, we'll have that conversation. But, we've got to start it somewhere. And that's what we decided to do with this podcast.
And it's really interesting, Ed, because I'm not sure any of us saw you coming in and being a permanent member, but I would say after your first episode with me, that was pretty much when I thought, okay, yeah, we definitely need to add this guy in for sure.
Yeah, I very similar to you, Ed, where growing up, I watched the San Francisco Giants. They were my local team, and listening to their commentators is kind of really what started it for me, is having that respect for the announcers and the knowledge that they truly had. I felt like it was insane. There's the San Francisco Giants. They have one of their commentators is Mike Kruger, who pitched in the majors, and I'll tell you what, the knowledge on that he has, it always just made me truly amazed. I mean, you give him any given date, and he'd tell you probably who the starting pitcher was who pitched that game. He, for instance, he'd probably say, "All right, that was Nolan Ryan." He'd tell you what Nolan Ryan had for breakfast that day. He'd tell you everything, and it's like, how do you know this stuff? But they do. That what it just comes to them, just as I like to say, it comes to us too. I was also looking at the stat sheets as a very young kid, and I'll tell you what, that is an art form to be able to not only summarize a game, but to have a stat sheet in a newspaper. That is an art form at its finest, in my opinion, because you look at stat sheets now, you look at game summaries, you go on ESPN or anywhere you may find your sports, you're going to see paragraphs. You're going to see a stat sheet so long. But back in the days on the newspapers, they got it in there and you knew exactly what happened in that game without even having to watch anything. So it is an art form at its finest. And it sounds like a lot of us kind of learn the same way. So, but with that being said, we would love to hear what got you guys hooked on sports. We'd love to hear your opinions, your stories, and that is what the comments section here that we have is at your disposal. Go on there, let us know. Make a video, tag us. You're going to see once this video is out, you will see our socials on every platform there is. So please let us know your stories, let us know your takes, because we value your opinions just as we hope that you value ours. So, with that also being said, let's start talking about some football. Let's recap this last Saturday, this very, very exciting action-packed Saturday. I mean, there was games everywhere, I'll tell you that. But I want to start first with David. Your thoughts. Georgia, Missouri.
Well, first off, let's talk about Missouri real quick. Missouri had a lot of preseason hype, and I'll admit I did not buy into the hype. I, for the life of me, cannot understand why people were hyping up Missouri so much. Well, now here they are 7-2, so I can admit that I was, wrong about Missouri. And a big reason why Missouri is 7-2 is because of the selflessness of head coach Eli Drinkwitz. As we all know, he gave up play calling duties and he handed that job over to first year offensive coordinator Kirby Moore. And what a difference it has made, because last year, Missouri on offense averaged 370 yards and then they averaged 25 points per game. So far this year in 2023, through 9 games, they're averaging 434 yards of offense and 32 points per game. So a pretty big jump in both yards and points. And you take a look at their big three with quarterback Brady Cook, running back Cody Schrader, and wide receiver Luther Burden III. So last year, all of 2022, Cook had 14 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, and that was the entirety of last season. Keep that in mind. Cody Schrader had 9 touchdowns through the air, and Luther Burden had 9 touchdowns on the ground. My mistake there. And Luther Burden had 6 touchdowns through the air. Through 9 games this year, gentlemen, each one of those players has already surpassed their touchdown total. Okay. Last year, Brady Cook had 14 touchdown passes. He has 16 touchdown passes through 9 games. Last year, Schrader had 9 touchdowns. He has 10 so far through 9 games. And then finally, Luther Burden last year had 6 touchdowns. He has 7 so far this year. And when you watch Missouri, it's easy to see why they've made improvement. Kirby Moore's scheme is getting guys wide open. It's not like they're fighting for anything. He's getting guys wide open. So that's a huge reason why Missouri has gone to 7-2 is because of the massive offensive improvement they made. And again, credit to Eli Drinkwitz because gentlemen, it's really not that easy to put your ego away, especially as a play caller. But I think Drinkwitz wants what's best for Missouri, and he obviously realized, hey, you know what? I'm not a great play caller, and that's okay. Not every head coach is meant to be a good play caller. They're meant to be good elsewhere. So kudos to Drinkwitz for seeing that. Now, as for Georgia, of course, they are the defending back-to-back champions, and they're still humming along despite losing some key players. But I don't know about you guys, but Georgia, for one, I think their defense is still really, really good, but just they're not. They don't really have that elite feel like last year. Now, Georgia fans, listen. I've learned the hard way that if you go after Georgia fans, they will bark literally. But listen, okay, they've given up 20 points, at least 20 points in 5 of their last 6 games. Okay, this is not the same defense that we saw last year, and then the defense we saw in 2021, which is a once in a generation, kind of defense. I think they allowed less than 10 points per game in the regular season, which is just insane and never happens. And then just they're not really instilling fear into their opponents like they have before. I mean, I'm not saying that teams don't what I'm trying to say is that teams just aren't afraid of Georgia, at least not like they were before. I mean, they were down 14-3 at one point to South Carolina. They only beat Vandy by 17. Of course, with a team like Vandy, a 17-point win is pretty underwhelming. And then Florida, our opening drive, we marched down their throats and scored a touchdown. And their opening drive, they only scored a field goal. But it really feels like this year that Georgia, more so than last year and the year before that, they are out talenting their opponents. Teams are kind of playing close with them for a bit, but then eventually Georgia just pulls ahead because of the talent they have, the talent advantage that they had. But as for the game itself, it was a fairly evenly matched. I mean, both teams had 21 first downs. Georgia had 385 yards of offense. Missouri had 363. But hey, give credit to Missouri, okay? Because they came to play, and I think even with the loss, Missouri has shown that they are clearly the second best team in the SEC East. And if I'm correct on this, Missouri is the first team to play within single digits of Georgia at Georgia since 2020 when Georgia played Mississippi State, I believe. So it was a very evenly matched game. From Missouri, I mean, I mentioned him before, Cody Schrader, more like Cody Shredder, am I right? Because he goes off for 112 yards on the ground and a touchdown. And Carson Beck had another efficient game with 254 yards through the air and 2 touchdowns on 21 of 32 passing. Brady Cook wasn't the best game for him, especially near the end of the fourth quarter. He threw a very costly interception to Nazir Stackhouse. And keep in mind, it wasn't like Nazir Stackhouse just grabbed the ball out of a Missouri receiver. No, Brady Cook quite literally threw the ball right into Stackhouse's hands. It was like, oh, thanks for that, you know? And then unfortunately for Georgia, they had to move back 15 yards because of a blindside block. But even so, that interception that Stackhouse got did eventually lead to Georgia, scoring the field goal and putting Missouri away for good. I think the game went about as pretty much everyone expected. But again, give credit to Missouri. And like I said, I did not initially believe the preseason hype, but now I believe Missouri is for real, and they are quite clearly the second best team in the SEC East. So those are my thoughts.
Well, it does look like Missouri, they've had some good wins this year, but Georgia is still Georgia. And that's really all we can really say at this point until we see otherwise. One game that I was really interested in this weekend was Kansas State at Texas. That's a game that ended with Texas winning 33-30 in overtime. So there was a long journey to get to that point. What we did find with that game is that Texas did dominate coming out of the gate with their redshirt freshman quarterback Malik Murphy taking the helm for Quinn Ewers, who is still out and injured with a shoulder injury. And everybody around Malik Murphy stepped up, and it was 17-0 within the first quarter. It looked like it was going to be a runaway. But here comes Sark, Steve Sarkisian, the coach for Texas, with his over-aggressive play calling. And you saw him, instead of trying to add points to squeeze Kansas State into submission, he goes for it on fourth down inside the red zone for the third straight week and fails to score for the third straight week. And it really starts to backfire because Kansas State from that point on just got better and better and better and really pretty much dominated the second half of that game. And when it comes to coaching and overcoaching, the Kansas State coach, Chris Klieman, he did pretty much the same thing that Steve Sarkisian did at the end of that game that Steve Sarkisian did at the beginning. He did a reckless fourth down call that cost his team the game. He essentially, because they could not convert. There was a chance Kansas State could kick a field goal, tie the game, go to a second overtime, and the longer that they were going to play, Kansas State was going to be able to, win that game. But they got overly aggressive, being on the road. The book always says, if you're on the road and you can tie it up, go for the win. So that's what he did. He went by the book, but it wasn't necessary, in my opinion, at that time. It just goes down a long line of coaching decisions that I have questions about. But in looking into the game itself, as far as on a stat sheet, you would see that Malik Murphy did throw for 248 yards for a touchdown and 2 interceptions that were costly. Kansas State really capitalized on those, and that is a hallmark of the Klieman School of Coaching when it comes to that. Everywhere he's been able to capitalize on those things. Kansas State, they're passing 327 yards, so more on that side. But on the rushing side, Texas was way more balanced. We had 230 yards of rushing, 112 of it by our number one back, Jonathan Brooks. Kansas State only rushed for 20 yards. That is a testament to Texas's front seven, which is just stacked full of, future NFL players, in my opinion, and a defense that is ready to go to the SEC. So they had to adjust, and that's where all the passing yards came in for Kansas State in that aspect. But overall, that game ended as it should have, with Texas winning, but it wasn't a cover by Vegas' standard, because they did have Kansas State losing by double digits. Kansas State, is a resilient team and takes on the personality of their head coach, and they showed the resilience and took Texas to the wire. But that was something that Texas needed, and it's a get through November, to be where you want to be at the end of the year. Some games you just have to get through, and that's what Texas did here. And, being a Texas fan myself, you can see from the jersey behind me, I was here for it 100%.
Yeah, I know a little thing or two when it comes to our coaches' decisions on being aggressive and going for these fourth down plays instead of taking the points. And Oregon did that, especially against Washington, which was such a pivotal matchup, a pivotal game in the Pac-12 right now. We could have gotten 6 points, and instead we went for fourth downs in the red zones, and we did not convert. So you start thinking, do you want to continue to play aggressive or do you want to take the points? And in those situations, we played aggressive and it did not pay off. But speaking of Washington, I want to go over this game against USC this week. And if you were a college football fan, you probably had this game circled, not even going into the week, probably going into the year, because you knew there was going to be two Heisman candidate quarterbacks playing probably at this game at this time of the year. And I'm talking about Michael Penix Jr. for Washington and Caleb Williams for USC. And yes, although USC does appear to be out of it, they still came out swinging. Caleb Williams was playing phenomenal, and they did go into the game knowing that their starting running back was going to be out as well. So they did come in a little beat up, but they came in not really playing for much, more so playing for pride, and that could be kind of scary. And this game was expected to be a shootout. Going into the game, I could not tell you off the top of my head, but I know the over under was near the 90s, which is itself is very high. But I do know for a fact that during the game, the live odds were then swinging all the way up to about 100, and it did get very close. USC did lose the game against Washington 52-42, and which ended up being 94 points total. So they did get very close to that 100. Would have been nice to see them break that. I'm sure a lot of the gamblers out there were probably wanting to take that over for sure, especially during the live odds. But still a very high scoring game. But if I were to ask you, if you are a college football fan, who had more yards for Washington, their quarterback or their running back? So Michael Penix Jr. is their quarterback or their running back, Dylan Johnson. No brainer, you're going to say Michael Penix Jr., right? Well, no, you would be wrong. And if you guess the running back, you'd also be wrong. It was tied. They both had 256 yards in their respective stats. So Michael Penix Jr., 256 yards passing, and Dylan Johnson, 256 yards rushing. Dylan Johnson, I mean, they won the game essentially with their legs, and that you do not hear that often with Michael Penix Jr. at the quarterback. Don't get me wrong, he threw some dimes out there. He was still responsible for 2 touchdowns throwing, but Dylan Johnson was the player of the game for me, having 4 touchdowns, 256 yards. I know that doesn't say much. This USC defense is horrible. I'm telling you guys, they not only not they don't know how to tackle, they just don't know how to play defense. But if you did not see the news, they did fire their defensive coordinator, Mr. Grinch, and I'm not talking about Jim Carrey, I'm talking about Alex Grinch. And it's probably safe to say he's never going to play defensive coordinator ever again, but I could be wrong. I don't know how this game works, but when it comes
Do
to
you,
coaching hires,
do you think they're going to make a movie about Alex Grinch, how the Grinch stole Lincoln Riley's money?
oh, I'm sure it's already being produced as we speak. Why wouldn't it be? But at the end of the day, Lincoln Riley's still swimming in the Benjamin. So I think he's probably looking forward to next year, and only him and only Caleb Williams know if he is coming back or not. So that's going to be a big college football headline going into next year. But needless to say, Washington, they are still keeping their playoff hopes alive. Just when things weren't looking the best for them the last couple of weeks, even though they did pull out wins, they came into this game, they dominated. Uh, they did give up 42 points, but you're talking about the reigning defending Heisman champion Caleb Williams. So USC is still going to ball out on offense. We know that. It's just their defense that is an atrocity, and Washington exploited that, especially on the run game. So 256 yards on the ground is very impressive. No matter, even if you're playing a defense that's horrible. So I'm going to give out all the respect where it's due with Dylan Johnson and that Washington offensive front line. Because as we all know, where do games get won? Within the trenches. So that offensive line, they did their job. That defensive line for USC did not. So that was a big game. Washington being undefeated, they still are the favorites within the Pac-12. and they could very well easily sneak into that final playoff spot if they do win the conference championship and they win out. So that was the game that I had my eyes on, especially as an Oregon Ducks fan. But as far as a college football fan, to see those two powerhouses at quarterback play each other, you better believe I was watching that game. So, but David, another big SEC game happened, and this was in the SEC West, and that was LSU and Alabama. What'd you see in that game?
Absolutely, Matthew. Well, as we all remember, LSU beat Alabama last year in a very highly contested matchup. This year, of course, we know that Alabama won 42-28. But keep in mind that the game was a lot closer than what the score had indicated. Like this wasn't a case where Alabama was ahead 42-21, and then LSU just scored a last second touchdown to make it closer than it was. Like, no, this was an evenly matched game throughout a good portion, and then Alabama just went ahead and scored touchdowns and put the game out of reach. But we've talked about Jalen Milroe before, and how about the game he had, especially on the ground? 155 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. I had to look up, what kind of record this was, because I knew that he was the first Alabama player to have, or excuse me, the first Alabama QB to have 4 rushing touchdowns. I don't know if it was the first in the Saban era or just the first in Alabama history. Well, it turns out he's the first quarterback in Alabama history to have 4 rushing touchdowns in a game. So he's been getting better and better and better. And gentlemen, Alabama is getting better and better and better. I talked before about how Alabama got off to a slow start, in air quotes, just because it's Alabama and the standards that they hold themselves to. Well, now I don't see them losing another game, at least on when it comes to their regular season schedule. We'll see what happens when they go into the SEC championship and beyond. But the other thing too, guys, is even though it came in a losing effort, Jaden Daniels had another phenomenal game. He had 219 rushing yards, or excuse me, 219 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 163 rushing yards, and one touchdown. Okay, and he's not going to be the front runner for the Heisman anymore, and that's not fair to him. I mean, he's going to drop out because of something that is not his fault at all. But that's just been the nature of the beast of the Heisman race this year. Because we have so many great players this year that truly the biggest way you can determine who's the front runner and who's not is by win-loss record. And if you guys recall, I mean, as far as I remember, the last time I can remember a player winning the Heisman Trophy, regardless of wins and losses, was Lamar Jackson, and I think that was 2016, if I remember correctly, because Lamar Jackson, very very first game, just put on a show, and he put the whole world on notice, and he was the runaway favorite from start to finish, and nobody was close to Lamar Jackson's level. Like, it would have been an insult if anybody had gotten it other than Lamar Jackson. And I believe that Louisville, by the time that he got the trophy, I believe that Louisville had 3 losses. I don't know if you guys recall, but for me, that's the last time that I can remember a player winning the Heisman, regardless of what his team's win-loss record was. But as for Jaden Daniels, again, he's not going to be the front runner, and that's not fair to him. But even though he probably won't win the Heisman, I think he should at least win the O'Brien Award. I mean, I think he's clearly the best quarterback. And keep in mind, guys, the Heisman Trophy, like, just because a quarterback wins the Heisman, that doesn't mean he's going to win the O'Brien. In fact, last year, Caleb Williams won the Heisman Trophy, but he did not win the O'Brien Award. You guys remember who won it last year? Max Duggan of TCU. So again, even though Jaden Daniels is probably not going to win the Heisman, I think he's clearly the favorite for the best quarterback award now at this point.
Yeah, very similar to how they do things in the NFL. You'll see the MVP, it's usually always a quarterback, but when you see the offensive player of the year, it's usually a non-quarterback. And so it always makes you think, like, so a non-quarterback won the offensive player of the year, but they didn't win MVP. The quarterback did, but that's just kind of how the cookie crumbles. At the end of the day, it usually ends up being a quarterback award. But this year, especially, we have some very phenomenal quarterbacks there in college football, and Jaden Daniels is for sure one of them. I do know that he did leave the game with a concussion, so I pray that he does clear protocols. I pray that he no longer has symptoms. I mean, those concussions they can add up and cause damage, but I hope that he's okay. And it was a phenomenal game, and those defenses did not scheme at all for a running quarterback. I'll tell you that.
And I would certainly say that that's one thing that's been missing out of Milroe's repertoire so far this year is those quarterback design runs. I've been calling for Milroe to have some Q powers, some quarterback draws, these design plays to include him into the run game while the wide receivers are pushing the coverage back away from the line of scrimmage. I mean, he's a dynamic player that's just getting better with every start. And quite honestly, I think that he's played himself into maybe not the true Heisman race, but at least in the conversation as he has continued to get better. And that's a hallmark of the Alabama team. They always get better throughout the season. They may have lost to Texas earlier in the season, but they're getting better. And, we're going to see the fruition of that. And as good as Alabama is at getting better, one team that I'm seeing get worse over the past month is Oklahoma.
You just
Oklahoma.
talk about the said.
I'm sorry.
I know you're eager to talk about this.
Oklahoma played Oklahoma State in the final Bedlam game of Big 12 play, and it wound up Oklahoma State did come out with the victory of 27-24 over Oklahoma. This was played in Stillwater, so it was a home game for the Cowboys. And, I've got to give credit where credit is due. Mike Gundy is a great coach for where he's at. He just claimed his 100th Big 12 victory, tying Bob Stoops and Bill Snyder as the only other coaches to have that feat in the Big 12. He's flirted with some other places like Tennessee and some other opportunities out there, but he's been good where he's at. He's malleable as far as adjusting his program to the players that are there, and not trying to stick to a singular schematic idea. Too many programs I see do the exact opposite. They want to stick to their identity, of what's in their brain and not really looking at the players that are there. And, so it becomes kind of a cross thing. So those coaches tend to not stay, in the game, at one place as long as Mike Gundy's been so far. They have only one loss in conference at this point, so they're tied with Texas. So it's really going to become a race down to who gets to the Big 12 championship game when essentially Oklahoma State has a 2-game lead against Oklahoma, which is who Texas really wanted to get some, I'll just say it, just some revenge on by having them meet up in Dallas at the end of this conference season. Couple things with Oklahoma and what I've really seen go south for them over the past month is their defense. Brent Venables' defense, he's the whole reason why they hired a defensive-minded coach. They've given up more than 400 yards of offense to the last 3 opponents, which are UCF, Kansas, and now Oklahoma State. That is not the hallmark of a Brent Venables team. And it really does appear that the Red River rivalry was the Super Bowl for Oklahoma's program this season because they made the T-shirts, they made the videos, they were on all the talk shows after that win, and here they are a month later, they are 1-2 after that game, and they are really better in personnel than anybody else that they've played, but they can't seem to take control of the games when they should, because it's not Texas. If it's Texas, they're going to get up for those games. But because it's not Texas, they're like, oh, we'll just roll a helmet out there and we'll just win this game and, move on with our lives. That's not how college football works. That's one of the reasons why we love this sport. With the NFL, you can lose a game and it's fine. Just as long as you win a majority of them, you're in good shape. With this, you have to be there, you have to be motivated, and you have to be able to take control of a game that you're supposed to take control of from start to finish every single week. We get 12 opportunities of this, and if you lose one game, you're on the precipice of missing out on your ultimate goals. You lose two, you're done. So that's kind of where Oklahoma is right now, kind of flailing down the pit. Whereas Oklahoma State, they are climbing that mountain to get to the Big 12 title game because that is their pinnacle for this season. I realize I kind of ran a little long. I apologize for that, but I will say there are some other teams out there that are climbing the ranks from over the past 3 weeks that we should be talking about too. I think Matthew was going to tell us about that.
Absolutely, I am. And I said earlier, if you're a college football fan, you had circled the USC Washington game. But if you're a true college football fan, you stay up for Pac 12 After Dark. And this week on Pac 12 After Dark, we had Arizona and UCLA. And you're thinking to yourself, Arizona and UCLA, and all you think of is Chip Kelly and that high flying offense that he has always had at Oregon and at UCLA. I'm talking about this Arizona Wildcats team. They are coming out of nowhere. They're coming out of left field right now. And if I would sit here and tell you that towards the end of the college football team, Arizona would be up there with LSU and Notre Dame as some of the best 3-loss teams in the nation, you'd be like, nah, I don't know about that one. But it's true. This Arizona team is looking phenomenal. And I'll tell you what, this may sound very contradicting to me, especially as an Oregon fan, but we just picked up a very big recruit in Elijah Rushing who decommitted from Arizona. But you have to think he may be sitting there thinking, wow, Arizona's actually putting together a very good team and a very good season, in fact. And I'm going to add that. I know that they do have 3 losses, and it is Arizona we're talking about, and they don't have a chance at winning the Pac-12 this year. But for this one last year in the Pac-12 for Arizona, I don't have one on, but I tip my cap to them of what they've done there and the injuries they've dealt with. At starting quarterback going into this game, they actually have a freshman. They have a freshman in Noah Fafita. It's hard to pronounce that name, but he is not their normal starting quarterback. Let that be known. But he is the starting quarterback for this game against UCLA, and he won that game for them. UCLA did pick up the loss. They only put up 10 points, and you're thinking this is a Chip Kelly team only putting up 10 points against an Arizona team, but that just shows you how good Arizona is. They did end up winning the game 27-10 with Noah Fafita throwing for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. And I'm just kind of disappointed in this UCLA offense. They are having trouble kind of establishing their identity. They've had Dante Moore at quarterback, who is an Oregon decommit, and they've had Garber as their other starting quarterback. And Garber's the one who started this game, and he just did not look good. He did not look good at all. But none of that UCLA team did. I mean, Carson Still, who's their running back, who is always known for putting up, pretty good numbers, did not as well. They just could not seem to get and find that rhythm. And Arizona took over both sides of the ball almost immediately because of that. So if you're a true college football fan, you stayed up, you watch that game. I'm on the East Coast. Pac-12 football after dark is almost morning time here when that game ends. And East Coast is very tough to watch sports. But if you're a true sports fan, you stay up, you watch those games. I mean, I can't tell you how many UFC fights I stay up and watch till the very end, and that's 2 o'clock in the morning. So this Pac-12 after dark game ended up being a huge game for Arizona. I very much like to see where they are headed. And as I've said before, I'm an Oregon Ducks fan. But to see another Pac-12 school such as them kind of come out of the trenches the way that they have, like I said, my cap's off to them. So Arizona, the last 3 weeks, you are trending up. You are going to be ranked once these college football playoff rankings come out. And I'm proud. I'm happy for you guys. But speaking of 3 weeks, a lot has changed in 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, we were talking about who the heck's going to win Heisman. I mean, you've got Caleb Williams, you've got Dylan Gabriel, Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix. I mean, there's a very long list. And now 3 weeks has passed, and I can only think of two quarterbacks right now, and that is Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix. I mean, I saw the odds change big time on Bo Nix over the last couple of weeks, and it just shows what he's doing. But the fact that 3 weeks has changed just like that in college football shows you what college football is all about. Just with on a dime, things can change. And that's exactly what's happening with Oklahoma right now and Dylan Gabriel. You're seeing their stock go down because of how quick things can change in college football. But what things also do change is the rankings of the teams. And we are going to go over here the AP rankings, not the college football rankings just yet, the AP rankings on how they shook and how they are after this weekend slate of football. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Ed, where he's going to talk about around the 10 range or so of the AP college football rankings. So, Ted, let fans know what you're going to talk about.
Sure. I'm going to talk about the logjam that we have between 7 and 11 when it comes to who we have listed right now. Currently, we have Texas at 7, Alabama at 8, Penn State at 9, Ole Miss at 10, and Louisville at 11. You know, overall, this is a true logjam. And I will say this week, we are probably going to see a couple of those teams fall off because it may be an elimination Saturday for both Penn State and Ole Miss, as they will be playing Michigan and Georgia respectively. So with those couple of games coming up, this is a huge weekend for top 10 matchups, and we are certainly here for that. But one thing I did want to talk about is what the expectation is once these playoff rankings come in versus what I just listed in the AP poll. What I'm anticipating is Alabama to jump Texas at this point and be that number 7 team over Texas. Even though Texas has a head-to-head against them, I think Alabama has a better win later in the year than what Texas had, and they had a better loss than what Alabama had. So those are kind of a couple of thoughts I had on that. So even though it's Texas, Alabama, Penn State, Ole Miss, and Louisville, I do anticipate to see by the time the playoff rankings come out on Tuesday, it's going to be Alabama, Texas, Penn State, Louisville, and Ole Miss. There is a case to be made for Louisville to be a little bit better than Ole Miss right now, and I think it's going to be splitting hairs. But in the end, we are going to see all this shake out. Right now, it's great to see, what are we anticipating from the AP and how it moves over to the college football playoff rankings. And, more of that jockeying for position is going to happen as you go up the ladder into the rankings, just like I'm going to have Matthew talk about.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about 4, 5, and 6 here. And I'm just going to start off by saying I don't see this changing from the AP to the college football. And number 4, I have Florida State. Number 5, we've got Washington. And number 6, we've got Oregon. And I really don't see any change happening there. I think those are going to stay stagnant. But I will say this is going to be up for such a big topic of discussion. I could go ahead and talk about this the whole show because like Texas Ed saying referring to as a logjam, that's how this whole college football playoff is going to shake up, in my opinion, if things are playing out how they are now. Towards the end of the pack on where Ed was saying I could see teams falling off, but this middle of the pack, this is where things get very, very tricky. You do have an undefeated Washington team over Oregon, who they do have a victory over, but the chances are they are going to be facing each other in the end at the conference championship game, and that is going to end up deciding who is going to leapfrog the other, and most likely in the college football playoff. But Florida State, they are still undefeated. Jordan Travis has evolved his game over the season. He's not playing like a Heisman contender, I'd say, but he is leading his team to an undefeated regular season at this moment. But I am not going to really see any changes there when it comes to Florida State, Washington, Oregon. But I do think as the weeks come, there is going to be some changes there, especially when we enter conference championship weekend. You're going to see this entire rankings shake up big time. But let's go with you, David. You got 1, 2, and 3 right here. In the AP pool, do you see them changing at all, or what are your thoughts?
I mean, I pretty much agree with the AP rankings as they are right now. So, we got Ohio State at number 3, we got Michigan at number 2, and we got Georgia at number 1. And I don't foresee any changes, especially I don't foresee any changes to the playoff rankings. Now, keep in mind that the AP top 3 and the playoff top 3 are different. So Ohio State is number 3 in the AP poll, but they're actually number 1 in the playoff poll. So they go from number 3 to number 1. And a big reason for that is because the playoff rankings take schedule into account, and Ohio State has played a tougher schedule than Michigan and Georgia have. Now, personally, and I can't believe I'm saying this as a Gator, but I think Georgia should be number 1 in both the playoff and the AP poll. Okay, I don't think Georgia has played the toughest schedule ever, but they are the defending back-to-back champions. Okay, and you know what they say: to beat the man, or excuse me, to be the man, you have to beat the man. Okay, and then Michigan, no question that they've been far and away the most dominant team in the country. Again, Michigan's schedule ain't exactly that tough either, but at the end of the day, you can only play who's in front of you. So yeah, I think the playoff rankings guys are going to be the same as last year. I think it's going to be Ohio State number 1, Georgia number 2, and Michigan number 3.
I want to ask you guys, where does strength of schedule play into the fold of these things? If you're on the committee right now and they ask you, this question is being asked, strength of schedule, where is that on a priority to you guys?
I would definitely put strength of schedule as one of my leading factors, simply because you have to be battle tested to say that you are better than the other people around you. If you're on a fifth grader's basketball court and you're already 6 foot tall, guess what? You're going to dominate them. But if you're 6 foot and you're playing against other 6 footers and you dominate there, then God bless you. You are going to be the best person out there. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. Currently, Georgia and Michigan, they're playing a bunch of fifth graders, and they are just wailing on these lower level teams. Whereas Ohio State, they have had teams come up to them, get a chest to chest, nose to nose, and get smacked in the mouth, smack back, and really put the Ohio State in jeopardy of where they are. Whereas Georgia and Michigan really haven't had that same kind of test, even though Georgia plays in what I would consider a tougher conference top to bottom and a tougher conference schedule top to bottom than what Michigan has. I would say that Ohio State has the better strength of schedule, so I can see why the college football playoff put them at number 1. But once again, that's going to shake out because Michigan and Ohio State, they are going to play. And as far as this week goes, we're going to see Georgia play a team that is ranked in the top 10 for the first time this year. We're going to see Michigan, somebody play somebody ranked in the top 10 for the first time this year. This could be an elimination Saturday for two teams in the top 10, and it's going to be phenomenal football to watch.
Yeah, I largely agree with that here, that I think strength of schedule does have to matter because for one, how can you truly say you're the best team if you've just been beating up on garbage teams all year? But that being said, I think also keep in mind that there's always more than meets the eye, okay? Because what if we have a situation, let's say that one team, like let's say that team A beats team B, and team A is undefeated and team B is now 8-1, so they have that one loss because of team A. So you might look at that and you might say like, well, look, team A got a good win over a strong team. But then let's look at team B, and then it turns out that team B hasn't exactly played the toughest schedule. In fact, team B has played a very, very, very easy schedule, and the one team with the pulse that they played, they lost. So I think that's also something to keep in mind, that there's always more than meets the eye when it comes to beating teams that appear to be strong and are strong on schedule. But those particular teams were playing easy teams along the way.
Yeah, I think the committee has their hands full. It's already being talked about that this is going to probably be the toughest year in their existence. And I say that because you have a Texas team who has the ninth hardest schedule, strength of schedule, and Alabama who has the number eight. So Alabama does have a tougher just by one, but Texas has beat them. So you look at head to head there, you have Texas over Alabama. But when you look at strength of schedule, there's not really any difference there. But like Ed said, he thinks that Alabama is going to jump Texas because of the victories they have later here in the season. So, I mean, things could get very, very interesting going into this conversation of who are we going to choose in the top four at the end of the day when conference championships are over with. It is going to be very tough, and I I couldn't do their job. I'll tell you that right now because it's going to be a tough one this year if things play out how in my head I'm thinking right now, it can be very tough, especially I'm telling you, Alabama, just remember that name right now. They are going to be a fork in the road for many teams because of who they are and how they're playing this late in the year. So keep an eye on that Alabama team. That's all I'm going to say. That's just my prediction right now is when it comes to that maybe that number 4 slot, they scare me there. So uh but yeah, so yeah.
And the scenario that David's talking about is, in my mind, the scenario that Matthew, your team is Oregon is running into with Washington is right now. I would say Oregon is the better team, but because of the head to head, I would put Washington above Oregon because there's such a thin margin between those two, and they haven't really had a way to differentiate themselves. Besides, the fact that Washington has had a couple of stumbles, but it's get through time of the schedule. So I think that's a tougher part of the scheduling, the ranking that the college football playoff is having to take in consideration is it's partly eye test. It's not just strength of schedule, but it's also eye test. Who's playing better right now? Is it an undefeated Washington team, or is it the one-loss Oregon team that lost to Washington when that Washington was playing better than they are now? I mean, how do you split that hair? That's what we're kind of running into. But that's not the only rankings that are out there right now. College basketball has just tipped off, and we being a sports show that is going to go just beyond the lights. We're going to go beyond college football, and we're going to talk a little bit, just getting us started with college basketball. And Matthew, you wanted to take a look at who we have ranked in the top 25 this year to start the season.
Yes, absolutely. And just like how we've talked about before with college football, it being all over the place, it can be very unpredictable, and one thing can happen and change the whole outcome. The same thing applies with college basketball. And I want to talk about the AP preseason pool top 25 for college basketball by conference. And you're going to know exactly what I mean when I say things are all over the place. I'm going to talk about here the different conferences and how many teams they have in the top 25. So we're going to start first with the AAC. AAC does have one team in the top 25. Next, we're going to go switch on over to the ACC that has three teams in the top 25. And the Big East, the infamous Big East, four teams in the top 25. I mean, you're looking already, we have three conferences there, especially with the ACC and the Big East, very well known with their college basketball teams, and they don't even have the most teams in the top 25. I'm going to get there. We have the Big Ten with three schools in the top 25, and over to the Big 12, four. So you're looking at the Big 12 now with four, as well as the Big East. And lately, the Big 12 has been bringing some phenomenal teams in the mix, especially come late March. And then we have the Mountain West with one team, the poor old Mountain West, but they're still representing thanks to San Diego State. The Pac 12 with two schools, and no, Oregon's not one of them, as sad as it may sound. They did have one. They were in there last year, but not this year. But hey, expectations are low. So I like that. But here's where now has the most teams in the pack are in the top 25, and that is the SEC with five schools in the top 25. And that shouldn't surprise you. I mean, you saw what Alabama did last year, although they are going to be without Brandon Miller this year. Alabama did have a phenomenal year. And the SEC itself, I mean, from the Razorbacks to Kentucky, I mean, Kentucky, they'll always let you down, it seems like nowadays, but you never know what could happen with them. And then the West Coast Conference, lastly, with two teams. So, I mean, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different conferences with schools within the top 25. And that just tells you all there needs to be about men's college basketball. And come March, how scattered it is when it comes to that. I mean, you're looking at the beginning of the year, 9 different conferences. And at the end of the day, we will see come March who will be victorious. But I do want to pass this now over to David in the top 5 in the AP preseason pool.
Yes. So the top 5 are from 5 through 1 are Marquette, number 5, Michigan State, number 4, Purdue, number 3, Duke, number 2, and Kansas, number 1. Now you'll notice who was not in the top 5, the defending champion, the UConn Huskies, but they are right there at number 6. So what I'm going to do real quick is that I'm just going to give a very quick reason why each of these teams are in the top 5. Okay, starting with Marquette. So why is Marquette in the top 5? Well, their leading scorer, Cam Jones, leading rebounder, Oso Ighodaro, and their top assist guy, Tyler Kolek, are all coming back. Okay. So the Golden Eagles have a nice balance on offense there, and the fact that all 3 of those guys are coming back, you would expect that that those guys individually are going to be better, and then that Marquette is going to be even better than they were last year. Okay. Michigan State. Why is Michigan State in the top 5? Because 2 of their top leading scorers from last year, and Tyson Walker and AJ Hoggard, are coming back. All right, Purdue. Why is Purdue ranked in the top 5? Do I need to say it? Zach Edey. Isn't it obvious? The player of the year last year, a guy who's an absolute monster on the court. I mean, as long as Purdue has Zach Edey, they are going to be in the top 5 pretty much all year, and they are no doubt going to be one of the title favorites. As for Duke, like the story always is with Duke, they have a strong recruiting class coming in. They have the number 2 class coming in per 24/7 Sports, and then finally the number 1 team, Kansas, added who I think was the best player from the transfer portal in Hunter Dickinson. You know, of course, he was a beast at Michigan, And when Kansas added Hunter Dickinson, I'm sure Kansas fans were thrilled, and every other college basketball fan was like, "You got to be kidding me!" So yeah, that's just my quick recap of why each of these teams are ranked in the top five. But Ed, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's certainly a case to be made all across the board there. Zach Edey, as long as he can get some help with the guard play around him, being able to defend on the perimeter, because he certainly has the center all on lock, then that definitely has a chance to make some noise as we get further down the line. But you're talking about Kansas being the number one team in the country. It's never too early to talk about bracketology. We all know this. We love bracketology when it comes to college basketball, and so there are some things even though you are ranked number one going into the season, does that necessarily mean you have just a walk in the park to being in the tournament? No, it does not. Because since 2000, there has been a team that didn't even get a tournament bid that was a preseason number one. One of them lost in the first round. Yes, there is a larger percentage. In fact, 76.3% of number one preseason number ones made it to the Sweet 16. That number actually goes down significantly the further you go down the line. It is a hard road going through the NCAA basketball season, then conference tournaments before you get to the big dance. And, overall, it is only 15% of preseason number one ranked teams have won the national championship game, and 8 of them lost in that national championship game. So 15% won, 21% lost in the national championship game, but that still is large range of outcomes that have nothing to do with that number one seed. You've got to go out there and earn it. You've got to go out there and take it. If you're not number one, take it from the other guy. That's what you do, all throughout the season. And here we are. We're at tip off. We're in the first half of this game. Let's see where it heads. And as we get down to the end of the season, when we get to March Madness. But just wanted to throw those couple of stats out there. Matthew, did you have anything to add to that?
I think it just goes to show you that come March, bracketology, I mean, you are seeing unpredictable after unpredictable Cinderella stories that there is out there. And that's why sometimes these rankings, I don't read too much into them because of that fact. Come March, anything can happen. There is no other tournament out there like March Madness. And I think I speak probably for all three of us when I say that there is no other tournament that comes close to that because of the unpredictable that can happen within there. You are brought in with 4-1 seeds, but you're not guaranteed to have 4-1 seeds at the end. So, I mean, I think it just shows you what college basketball is and why the tournament itself is so popular. Everyone loves a Cinderella story. Everyone loves to root for the underdog unless you're against that team. So that's my 2 cents. I look forward to March every year, but the lead up to March is this, in fact. So it is important to go over these rankings, where teams stand, and just kind of shows you where every team is at all throughout the country. Just as I said before, 9 different conferences is made up just in the top 25 alone.
And also, Matthew, keep in mind too that things have not turned out well for the number one overall seeds. In fact, the last time the number one overall seed won it all was Louisville in 2013. But of course, Louisville got their title taken away. So technically, Kentucky the year before that was the last number one overall seed to win it. And then last year, Alabama was far and away the best team, at least in the regular season. And then they didn't even make it to the Final Four. So it is March Madness is truly unpredictable, and that is why we all love it so much.
Yeah, that Alabama team very well could have actually made it if they were not plagued with a lot of this off the court issues that they had. And that messes with a team, the chemistry, just everything, your playing ability. But you know what? It's all shoulda, coulda, woulda at that point. They did not make it. They did not win, and now it's on to this season. So just shows you anything can happen. But with that being said, I really want to thank first and foremost Ed and David. Without you two, this show would not be possible. So I do want to thank you guys for being here, for giving the fans, giving myself the content that we all desire. So I thank you guys, and I do want to thank the fans, the guys that have been with us from the beginning, all the subscribers. Without you guys as well, this would not be possible. So please continue to like, share, comment. As I said at the beginning, we want to hear your guys' opinions. We want to hear where you stand with your teams or even just teams in general. And we also want to hear how you might have got started with sports. There's always a beginning story. And I urge you, if you remember it, please share it because I love to hear how people got involved with sports and involved with their teams. If you do not remember, me and David did share originally when we started this show how we got involved with our teams, Oregon and Florida. And there's always a story. There's always a cool story. You may not even been born into it. And me and David can attest to that. We were not born into a duck family or a gator family, but we did get there eventually because, we always find home eventually. But we all have those stories. So once again, I urge you, please share those, but also please like and subscribe and follow us. We do have a new show name. If you did not catch at the beginning, we are Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. You can find us on all the socials. We do have that linked. So please check us out there. Lastly, I am Matthew Raridan, your host. That is David Street, and that is Ed Smith. And we are rounding third, and we are going home.